This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
A bleak, stormy heath in Scotland loomed ominously under dark skies. It was here that three witches materialized, setting a foreboding tone for the events about to unfold. The wind howled through the gnarled trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and something more sinister. Lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating the witches' twisted forms for brief, terrifying moments. The air around them seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy as they huddled together, their faces hidden beneath tattered hoods. Their whispers, barely audible above the howling wind, spoke of a meeting with Macbeth, a general in King Duncan's army. The very mention of his name seemed to make the air grow colder. Miles away, the clash of steel and battle cries faded into memory as Macbeth and his fellow general, Banquo, made their way across the misty landscape. The fog clung to their armor, still stained with the day's combat. Macbeth's face, etched with the weariness of battle, held a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Yet beneath that pride lurked something else, a hunger for more. As they crossed the heath, the mist seemed to part like a curtain, revealing the three witches. Their sudden appearance sent a chill down Macbeth's spine, colder than any Scottish wind. With voices that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth, they greeted him with three prophecies. Hail Macbeth, Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and future King of Scotland. Macbeth's heart raced, his mind reeling from their words. He was indeed Thane of Glamis, but Thane of Cawdor. And King? The possibilities made his head spin like a whirlpool, drawing him deeper into dangerous thoughts. Turning to Banquo, the witches continued their prophecy. You shall father a line of kings, they croaked, their voices like gravel scraping against stone, though you'll never wear the crown yourself. Banquo's brow furrowed, a mix of curiosity and unease crossing his features. As quickly as they had appeared, the witches vanished into the mist, leaving Macbeth and Banquo stunned. The heath fell silent, save for the whistle of the wind through the heather. The two men exchanged bewildered glances, their minds grappling with what they had just witnessed. The air around them felt charged, as if the very fabric of their world had shifted. The sound of approaching horses broke the silence, hooves pounding against the sodden earth. Ross and Angus, two noblemen, rode towards them, their cloaks billowing in the wind like dark wings. Their faces bore expressions of urgency and excitement. Macbeth, Ross called out as they drew near, his voice carrying on the wind. We bring news from King Duncan himself. Angus nodded, adding, The king has named you the new Thane of Cawdor. The previous Thane has been executed for treason. The words hit Macbeth like a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs. His eyes widened, and he felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him as pale as the mist that surrounded them. The witch's first prophecy had come true, and so quickly. His mind raced, thoughts of kingship now seeming less like fantasy and more like destiny. Banquo, ever observant, noticed the change in his friend's demeanor. His own face clouded with concern as he placed a hand on Macbeth's shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. Be wary, my friend, he cautioned, his voice low and urgent. Evil often tells half-truths to win us over. This prophecy may be a double-edged sword. As they continued their journey to meet the king, Macbeth's thoughts churned like a stormy sea. The taste of victory from the battle was now overshadowed by the intoxicating possibility of power. He imagined himself wearing the crown, its weight both glorious and terrible. But with each step, the weight of these thoughts grew heavier, tinged with the knowledge that such ambitions were treasonous. Banquo watched his friend closely, growing increasingly worried. The man who rode beside him seemed changed, lost in a world of his own making. The prophecies had taken root, and Banquo feared what might grow from them. The seeds of ambition, once planted, could grow into monstrous things. As they neared the end of their journey, the landscape began to change. The bleak heath gave way to rolling hills and the distant silhouette of a castle. Macbeth's eyes fixed on that distant shape, his mind already racing ahead. He could almost feel the warmth of his own hearth, the comfort of his own bed. But more than that, he longed to share the day's extraordinary events with one person. His wife, Lady Macbeth, would be waiting for him. The thought of her reaction to the witch's prophecy sent a thrill through him. She had always been ambitious, always pushing him to reach higher. What would she make of this? As the castle grew closer, Macbeth's anticipation grew. He spurred his horse on, eager to reach home and share his news. Little did he know that this eagerness, this burning desire to share the prophecy, would set in motion events that would change not just his life, but the fate of all Scotland. As he rode towards Inverness, towards his beloved wife in the comfort of home, the wheels of destiny began to turn. The story of Macbeth, once a tale of valor and loyalty, was about to take a dark and treacherous turn. Macbeth, weary from battle but buoyed by prophecy, journeyed back to his castle in Inverness. His heart raced with anticipation as he approached the familiar stone walls, eager to share the witch's words with his beloved wife. The air was thick with the scent of heather and damp earth as Macbeth dismounted, his boots sinking slightly into the muddy ground. The castle loomed before him, its gray stones seeming to whisper secrets of power and destiny. As he entered, the warmth of the hearth fire embraced him, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in his bones during the long ride home. Lady Macbeth stood waiting, her eyes alight with a mixture of love and barely contained ambition. She rushed to embrace her husband, her silk gown rustling softly against the rushes on the floor. "My love," she breathed, her voice low and intense. "What news do you bring?" Macbeth pulled away, his hands shaking slightly as he retrieved a folded parchment from his doublet. "A letter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You must read it at once." Lady Macbeth's fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter, her eyes devouring each word. The parchment crinkled in her grip, the sound like dry leaves in autumn, a harbinger of change. With each line, her breath quickened and a fire ignited in her eyes. "My dearest partner of greatness," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. She paced the room, her skirts swishing against the floor, her mind racing with possibilities. The words of the prophecy burned in her mind, fueling a blaze of ambition that threatened to consume her. Lady Macbeth's delicate features hardened into a mask of determination. She turned to her husband, her gaze piercing. "Your nature," she said, her voice now carrying an edge sharp enough to cut through steel. "It's too full of the milk of human kindness. It may hinder our path to power." The air grew heavy, as if the very spirits Lady Macbeth would soon summon were already gathering. She raised her arms, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Unsex me here," she implored, "and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty." Macbeth watched, a mixture of awe and unease settling in his gut. He loved his wife, admired her strength, but the darkness in her eyes sent a shiver down his spine. As night fell, casting long shadows across the castle grounds, Macbeth found himself alone on the ramparts. The cool Scottish air did little to calm the storm in his mind. "Duncan comes here tonight," he muttered, his brow furrowed. The weight of loyalty and kinship pressed down on him like a physical force. But Lady Macbeth's words echoed in his ears, a siren song of ambition. Her plan, detailed and ruthless, played out in his mind's eye. He saw the drug guards, the unguarded chamber, the glint of a dagger in the moonlight. His stomach churned, torn between desire for power and the bonds of honor. Below, the castle bustled with preparation for the king's arrival. The clatter of dishes and the aroma of roasting meat filled the air, a stark contrast to the bitter taste of betrayal in Macbeth's mouth. Servants scurried about, oblivious to the plot unfolding around them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood and gold, Macbeth rejoined his wife. They stood together on the castle steps, their fingers intertwined. The warmth of her hand was at odds with the coldness in her eyes. "Are you resolved?" Lady Macbeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Macbeth swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I am," he replied, though uncertainty lingered in his tone. They watched as the king's retinue approached in the distance, torches flickering like fireflies in the gathering dusk. The trap was set, the die cast. As they prepared to welcome their guest and king, the air thrummed with unspoken tension. Suddenly, the sound of creaking metal pierced the night. Macbeth's heart leapt to his throat as he realized what it meant. The grand gates of Inverness Castle were opening, their ancient hinges groaning under the weight. King Duncan had arrived. The grand gates of Inverness Castle creaked open, their ancient hinges groaning under the weight. A wave of anticipation swept through the courtyard as King Duncan and his entourage arrived, their horses' hooves clattering against the cobblestones. Lady Macbeth emerged from the castle, her emerald gown rustling softly as she descended the worn stone steps. Her face was a mask of warmth and welcome, but her eyes glinted with a hidden fire. As she approached the royal party, the flickering torchlight cast dancing shadows across her features, giving her an almost otherworldly appearance. "Your Majesty," she purred, sinking into a deep curtsy, "Inverness is honored by your presence. Our humble castle is yours to command." King Duncan's weathered face broke into a genuine smile as he clasped Lady Macbeth's hands. "My dear Lady Macbeth, your hospitality already outshines the stars above. What a delightful atmosphere you've created." The castle buzzed with activity as servants scurried about, their arms laden with platters of steaming food and pitchers of rich wine. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted meats, freshly baked bread, and sweet spices. It was a feast fit for a king, and the thought made Lady Macbeth's lips curl into a secret smile. In the great hall, the walls adorned with intricate tapestries depicting ancient battles, laughter and merry conversation echoed off the stone walls. King Duncan, seated at the head of the long oak table, raised his goblet high. "A toast," he proclaimed, his voice carrying over the din, "to our gracious hosts and to the future of our kingdom." The room fell silent as Duncan continued, his words falling like heavy stones in a still pond. "And speaking of the future, I have an announcement to make. My eldest son, Malcolm, shall henceforth be known as the Prince of Cumberland, heir to my throne." A ripple of applause swept through the hall, but for Macbeth, it was as if all the air had been sucked from the room. His dreams of kingship, so tantalizingly close, now seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. His eyes met Lady Macbeth's across the room, a silent conversation passing between them. Her gaze hardened, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod. As the night wore on and the wine flowed freely, Macbeth found himself drawn away from the festivities. He slipped out onto a shadowy balcony, the cool night air a stark contrast to the stuffy warmth of the great hall. The weight of his impending actions pressed down on him like a physical force, making it hard to breathe. "Is this dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand?" he whispered to the darkness, his mind conjuring spectral images of the deed to come. "Come, let me clutch thee." But as his hand reached out, it grasped only empty air. Macbeth shuddered, the chill of the night seeping into his bones. He was a man torn, duty and ambition, waging war within his breast. Lady Macbeth's soft footsteps broke through his reverie. She approached like a predator, her eyes glinting with determination in the moonlight. "Why have you left the hall, my love?" she purred, her words a silken noose. "The deed must be done tonight." Macbeth turned to her, his face a mask of anguish. "But Duncan has been so kind, so trusting. He's here in our home, under our protection. How can we betray that trust?" Lady Macbeth's lips curled into a sneer. "Are you a man?" she hissed, her words sharp as daggers. "You were bold enough when we discussed this. Are you now too cowardly to act on your ambitions?" Her words stung, igniting a fire in Macbeth's chest. He straightened, squaring his shoulders. "I am no coward," he growled, though doubt still gnawed at the edges of his resolve. As the castle settled into the quiet of night, Lady Macbeth set about her grim task. With practiced ease, she slipped a potent sleeping draught into the wine of Duncan's guards. Soon their snores echoed through the stone corridors, a discordant lullaby to the violence to come. In the oppressive silence of the midnight hour, Macbeth stood alone in a dimly lit corridor. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out all other sound. And then he saw it, a dagger suspended in the air before him, its blade gleaming wickedly in the faint light. Macbeth blinked, rubbed his eyes, but the vision remained. The spectral weapon seemed to beckon him, leading the way to Duncan's chamber like a macabre guide. Sweat beaded on Macbeth's brow as he realized this hallucination was a manifestation of his own guilty conscience, a last desperate warning from his better nature. Yet even as his mind recoiled from the horror of what he was about to do, Macbeth found his feet carrying him forward. The die was cast, the Rubicon crossed. With each step towards Duncan's chamber, Macbeth left behind the man he once was, marching inexorably towards a future stained with blood and haunted by the ghosts of his actions. As he reached for the door handle, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the nearby torches, plunging the corridor into complete darkness. Macbeth froze, his hand hovering inches from the door. In the pitch black, the weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical force. Would he step forward into the darkness, both literal and metaphorical, or would he turn back? The answer lay just beyond that threshold, waiting in the shadows. Darkness enveloped the castle, its shadows deep and foreboding. Macbeth crept towards Duncan's chamber, each step bringing him closer to a fate he both desired and dreaded. The stone walls seemed alive, their rough surfaces catching the flickering torchlight and casting writhing shadows that danced like restless spirits. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and burning tallow, mingling with the metallic tang of fear that clung to Macbeth's skin. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat a deafening roar in the oppressive silence of the night. As he approached the king's chamber, Macbeth's hand trembled on the hilt of his dagger. Cold sweat beaded on his brow, trickling down his face like icy fingers of doubt. The weight of his impending actions pressed down upon him, making each step a monumental effort. Inside, Duncan lay peacefully asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Macbeth hesitated, his resolve wavering like a candle flame in a draught. The room seemed to spin around him, reality blurring at the edges as he raised the dagger. Its polished surface caught the dim light, reflecting Macbeth's own tortured expression back at him. The deed itself was a blur of motion and muffled sounds. The soft whisper of blade through flesh, a choked gasp quickly silenced, and then stillness. Macbeth stumbled back, his hands slick with blood that seemed to burn his skin. The metallic scent clung to him like a second skin, threatening to suffocate him. When he returned to Lady Macbeth, his eyes were wild, haunted by the enormity of what he had done. "I hear voices," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry leaves underfoot. "They cry, 'Sleep no more?' Macbeth has murdered sleep." He stared at his hand, seeing not just blood, but the stain of his guilt spreading like a dark tide. "I'll sleep no more." Lady Macbeth's face hardened, her eyes glinting like shards of ice in the dim light. "Wash your hands," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Put on your nightgown. You must not look so pale." Her words were a slap, jolting Macbeth from his spiral of guilt. But Macbeth was lost in his own horror, trapped in a maze of his making. "I couldn't say amen when they prayed," he muttered, his words tumbling out like pebbles down a hillside. The words stuck in my throat like a bone. With a frustrated sigh that spoke volumes of her contempt, Lady Macbeth snatched the bloody daggers from Macbeth's grasp. "Coward!" she spat, the word hanging in the air between them like a physical thing. Her own resolve was unwavering as she strode purposefully back to the scene of the crime, her steps echoing in the empty corridors. In Duncan's chamber, she smeared the sleeping guards with blood, her movements quick and efficient. The act was cold, calculated, a stark contrast to Macbeth's frenzied state. As she planted the weapons beside the guards, a grim smile played at the corners of her mouth, satisfaction glinting in her eyes. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that seemed to mock the darkness of the night's events, a loud knocking echoed through the castle. The sound reverberated through the stone walls, each knock like a hammer blow to Macbeth's guilty conscience. Macduff and Lennox had arrived, their voices carrying through the morning air, unaware of the horror that awaited them. Macbeth, now dressed in fresh clothes that hid the evidence of his crime, led them to Duncan's chamber. His face was a mask of shock as they discovered the king's body, his performance convincing enough to fool the unsuspecting nobles. Chaos erupted as the alarm was raised. The air grew thick with tension and suspicion, the scent of fear mingling with the lingering smell of blood. Amidst the confusion, Lady Macbeth feigned a fainting spell, her body crumpling to the floor with practiced grace. Drawing attention away from her husband, Duncan's sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, huddled together in a corner, their young faces etched with fear and confusion. "We are not safe here," Malcolm whispered urgently to his brother, his words barely audible above the growing commotion. "We must flee." As the brothers made their hasty escape, Macbeth seized the opportunity to solidify his alibi. In a display of apparent rage, he slew the guards, his sword flashing in the early morning light. "Their guilt drove me to this impulsive act," he declared, his voice ringing out with false conviction. But not all were convinced. Banquo and Macduff exchanged wary glances, seeds of doubt taking root in their minds. Their eyes narrowed as they watched Macbeth, noting the way his hands shook ever so slightly, the wild look that lingered in his eyes despite his composed exterior. As the dust settled and the truth of Duncan's death sank in, a new reality emerged. With the king dead and his heirs fled, Macbeth found himself next in line for the throne. The witch's prophecy had come to pass, but as he ascended to his new position as King of Scotland, the weight of his actions hung heavy upon him. The crown, once a symbol of power and glory, now felt like a band of iron tightening around his head. As Macbeth stood before his subjects, their faces a sea of mixed emotions: fear, awe, suspicion. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The throne room seemed to stretch endlessly before him, the path to true power suddenly fraught with unseen dangers. In the distance, the ancient stones of Scone loomed, silent sentinels awaiting the coronation of their new king and queen. As night fell once more, Macbeth found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing with the possibilities and perils that lay ahead. What price would he yet pay for his ambition? And more importantly, what price would Scotland pay? The ancient stones of Scone stood silent, witnesses to a momentous occasion. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth were about to be crowned King and Queen of Scotland, their destiny unfolding before a wary crowd. The air crackled with tension as the royal couple approached the throne. Golden crowns glinted in the pale sunlight, their brilliance a stark contrast to the somber mood. As the crowns settled on their heads, a collective intake of breath rippled through the assembly. Whispers slithered through the crowd like snakes in tall grass. Nobles exchanged furtive glances, their eyes betraying suspicions about Duncan's untimely death and his son's convenient disappearance. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations, making it hard to breathe. Banquo stood apart, his face a mask of deep thought. The witch's prophecy echoed in his mind, refusing to be silenced. As Macbeth donned the crown, a chill ran down Banquo's spine. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture as clear as it was disturbing. In the quiet moments after the coronation, Banquo found himself lost in a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. Hope and fear battled within him, each vying for control. The witch's words about his own descendants becoming kings danced on the edge of his consciousness, both thrilling and terrifying him. Macbeth, now adorned with the trappings of royalty, felt the weight of the crown like a noose tightening around his neck. His eyes darted nervously from face to face, searching for signs of treachery. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he forced a smile, extending an invitation to Banquo and Fleance for a royal banquet. The words tasted bitter on his tongue. As night fell, shadows crept across the castle walls like grasping fingers. Macbeth sought out Lady Macbeth in a secluded corner, his voice trembling as he confessed his fears. "Banquo knows too much," he whispered, the words hanging heavy in the air. "And the prophecy. It threatens everything we've gained." Lady Macbeth's eyes glittered dangerously in the flickering torchlight. Her mind spun with plans, each more ruthless than the last. "Then we must act," she hissed, her words as sharp as a dagger's edge. Macbeth's paranoia grew like a weed, choking out all reason. Every shadow held a potential assassin, every whispered conversation a plot against him. The crown that had seemed so desirable now felt like a target on his head, painting him for death. In the depths of night, Macbeth paced the cold stone floors, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. His soliloquy was a testament to his moral decay, each word dripping with the poison of his ambition. "Banquo and Fleance," he muttered, his eyes wild with fear and determination. "They must be eliminated." The thought sent a shiver of anticipation down his spine, a perverse thrill at the power he now wielded. With trembling hands, he summoned his most trusted men, laying out his plan for an ambush in hushed tones. The assassins nodded grimly, their loyalty to their new king overriding any moral qualms. As Macbeth's reign of terror began to take shape, ripples of discontent spread throughout the kingdom like cracks in ice. Malcolm, safe in England, began to gather support, his determination growing with each passing day. Macduff, his brow furrowed with growing suspicion, started to distance himself from the new king, his loyalty to Scotland outweighing his allegiance to its ruler. The once revered general, Macbeth, now cut a lonely figure on the throne. The nobles who had once sung his praises now regarded him with a mixture of fear and distrust. Their eyes, once filled with admiration, now held questions they dared not voice aloud. In hushed corners and behind closed doors, whispers of Duncan's mysterious death grew louder, like a gathering storm. The circumstances surrounding that fateful night were scrutinized, each retelling adding fuel to the fire of suspicion. The kingdom that had celebrated Macbeth's coronation now held its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. As the sun set on this tumultuous day, the shadows lengthened across Scotland, like reaching fingers of doom. Macbeth sat alone on his ill-gotten throne, the crown a heavy burden upon his troubled brow. His mind raced with plans and fears, each thought more desperate than the last. Suddenly, a knock at the chamber door made him start. His heart pounding, Macbeth called out, "Enter!" As the door creaked open, he steeled himself for what was to come. The time had come to set his dark plans in motion, and there would be no turning back. Macbeth summoned 2 hired assassins to his chambers. With cunning words and false promises, he prepared to manipulate them into believing Banquo was their true enemy. The stone walls of the castle seemed to close in, the air thick with tension and the scent of burning torches. Shadows danced across Macbeth's face as he paced before the men, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. "Banquo," he hissed, his eyes glinting in the flickering light, "is the root of your misfortunes. His very breath threatens your families, your future." The assassins, their faces weathered by years of hardship, nodded slowly. Hatred kindled in their eyes, fanned by Macbeth's carefully crafted lies. He watched them, a spider observing flies caught in his web of deceit. As the meeting drew to a close, Macbeth made a split-second decision. "There's one more," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A third figure emerged from the shadows, face hidden beneath a dark hood. The newcomer's presence sent a chill through the room, adding another layer of mystery to the deadly plot. Night fell over the Scottish countryside like a heavy velvet cloak. Banquo and his son Fleance rode towards Macbeth's castle, the rhythmic clip-clop of their horses' hooves the only sound in the still air. Banquo's mind raced, torn between thoughts of the upcoming banquet and the unsettling prophecies of the witches. He turned to Fleance, his voice hushed. "My boy, something's not right about Macbeth. The crown, it doesn't sit well on his head." Fleance, young and innocent, could only nod, his eyes wide with confusion and a hint of fear. The castle loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the star-studded sky. As they approached, the peaceful night exploded into chaos. The assassins burst from the shadows like wolves, their blades glinting in the moonlight. Steel clashed against steel, the sounds shattering the night silence. Banquo fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, his sword a blur of motion, but he was outnumbered, outmatched. With his last breath, he shouted to his son, "Run, boy, run!" In the confusion, Flint slipped away, swallowed by the darkness. The night air carried the sound of his frantic footsteps, fading into nothing. The murderers, panting and splattered with blood, returned to Macbeth. Their partial success drained the color from his face. Flence's escape was a loose thread that threatened to unravel his carefully woven plans. As the assassins left, Macbeth stood alone, his mind a tempest of fears and doubts. The witch's prophecy about Banquo's lineage echoed in his ears, mocking his incomplete victory. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every whisper of wind carried the promise of retribution. Macbeth's hands trembled as he prepared for the banquet, unaware of the horror that awaited him. The ghost of his guilt, wearing Banquo's face, would soon make its chilling appearance, marking the beginning of Macbeth's public unraveling. The murder of Banquo, once his closest friend, was more than just another death. It was Macbeth's final step into the abyss of tyranny. Like a man who had set fire to his own house, he now stood amid the flames of his ambition, ready to destroy anyone he saw as a threat to his ill-gotten power. As the time for the banquet drew near, Macbeth felt a growing sense of unease. He straightened his crown, took a deep breath, and stepped towards the grand hall. The buzz of voices grew louder, the air thick with anticipation. What awaited him beyond those heavy wooden doors? With a trembling hand, he reached for the handle, his heart pounding in his chest. The grand hall of Dunsinane Castle buzzed with anticipation. The royal banquet was about to begin, and tension hung thick in the air. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth stood at the entrance, their faces fixed with welcoming smiles that barely concealed the storm brewing beneath. The flickering torchlight cast long, dancing shadows across the stone walls, mirroring the unease that rippled through the gathering nobles. As the guests filed in, the clinking of armor and rustling of fine fabrics filled the air. Whispers and sidelong glances followed the royal couple like persistent ghosts. Macbeth's hand trembled slightly as he raised it in greeting, his eyes darting from face to face, searching for signs of mistrust. The weight of his crown seemed to press down on him, heavier with each passing moment. The feast began, a lavish spread of roasted meats and rich wines laid out on long tables. The aroma of spices and roasted meat filled the air, but to Macbeth it might as well have been sawdust. He chewed mechanically, each bite turning to ash in his mouth. His heart pounded in his chest, a relentless drumbeat of guilt and fear. As Macbeth rose to take his seat at the head of the table, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. There in his chair sat the ghost of Banquo, his dead eyes boring into Macbeth's soul. The room suddenly felt ice cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of the feast. Macbeth stumbled back, his face draining of color. "Thou canst not say I did it," he cried out, his voice a strangled whisper that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The room fell still, all eyes turning to their king. The clattering of a dropped goblet rang out, painfully loud in the hushed hall. Lady Macbeth, her mind as sharp as a dagger, leapt to her feet. "My lords, pay no mind," she said, her voice steady despite the panic flashing in her eyes. "The king is prone to such fits. 'Tis nothing new, I assure you." She moved with the grace of a panther, placing herself between Macbeth and the stunned guests. She grabbed Macbeth's arm, her nails digging into his flesh like talons. "Are you a man?" she hissed in his ear, her words dripping with venom. "Pull yourself together, or all is lost." Her breath was hot against his skin, a stark reminder of the fire that burned within her. The ghost vanished, melting away like mist in the morning sun. Macbeth shook his head, droplets of sweat flying from his brow. He forced a laugh, the sound brittle and false. Raising his goblet, he called out, "To our dear friend Banquo, who should be here but is not. To Banquo." The nobles echoed the toast uneasily, the wine tasting sour on their tongues. For a heartbeat, it seemed the crisis had passed. But then, like a nightmare that refuses to end, the ghost reappeared, its hollow eyes fixed on Macbeth. This time, Macbeth's reaction was violent. He leapt back, knocking over his chair with a crash that echoed through the hall like a thunderclap. "Avaunt, and quit my sight," he roared, his eyes wild with terror. "Let the earth hide thee." His voice cracked, raw with fear and desperation. The room erupted into chaos. Lords and ladies scrambled from their seats, some reaching for weapons, others backing away in fear. The scraping of chairs and the clatter of falling dishes created a cacophony of panic. Lady Macbeth's composure finally cracked, her face a mask of desperation. "My noble lords," she cried out, her voice shrill with panic. "I pray you, take your leave. The king is unwell. We must attend to him at once." Her words tumbled out, each one laced with barely concealed terror. As the guests fled like leaves before a storm, Macbeth stood alone in the center of the room, his chest heaving. The weight of his crimes pressed down on him like a physical force, threatening to crush him. The once grand hall now felt like a tomb, silent and oppressive. In the sudden, terrible silence, Macbeth turned to his wife. "I must know more," he said, his voice hoarse and raw. "I will to the Weird Sisters. In this borrowed power, I swim against the current. I must know what lies ahead." His eyes were feverish, burning with a desperate need for answers. His gaze narrowed, a new fear taking root like a poisonous weed. And Macduff? Where was Macduff tonight? He muttered, more to himself than to Lady Macbeth. I will have spies in every noble's home. No one can be trusted, no one. As the last echoes of the disastrous banquet faded away, Macbeth stood alone in the empty hall, a king surrounded by ghosts and shadows. His reign, built on blood and treachery, was beginning to crumble, and the taste of ashes filled his mouth. The torches flickered, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. In that moment, Macbeth felt the full weight of his actions bearing down on him. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. A cold determination settled over him like a shroud. He would not let this power slip away, no matter the cost. With a final glance at the now empty hall, Macbeth strode toward the door, his mind already racing with plans. The witches held the key to his future, and he would stop at nothing to unlock it. Macbeth's insatiable thirst for power consumed him. He felt compelled to seek out the witches once more, desperate to secure his position and uncover more about his fate. The night air hung heavy with mist as Macbeth trudged through the dense forest. Gnarled branches clawed at his cloak, their shadows dancing in the moonlight like restless spirits. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat a mixture of dread and anticipation. The scent of decay and sulfur assaulted his nostrils as he approached a yawning cavern. Its entrance gaped wide, a maw of darkness that seemed to hunger for his very soul. Steeling himself, Macbeth plunged into the inky depths. Inside, he found the witches huddled around a bubbling cauldron, their faces twisted into grotesque grins. "We've been expecting you, Macbeth," they cackled in unison, their voices like nails on slate. Joined by Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft, the crones began their dark ritual. The air crackled with otherworldly energy as they chanted, swirling mists coalescing into three ghostly apparitions. The first materialized, an armed head hovering in the air like a gruesome trophy. Its lifeless eyes bored into Macbeth as it rasped, "Beware Macduff." The warning sent a chill down Macbeth's spine before the apparition vanished. Before he could process this, the second apparition appeared. A child, innocent yet blood-streaked, spoke with an unnaturally mature voice. "None of woman born shall harm Macbeth," it declared confidently. Hope flickered in Macbeth's chest. Was this a promise of invincibility? His lips curled into a smirk as the third apparition took form, a crowned child holding a tree. It proclaimed regally, "Macbeth shall never vanquished be, until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him." Emboldened by these seemingly impossible conditions, Macbeth felt a surge of invincibility. Yet a nagging doubt gnawed at him. "Tell me," he demanded, his voice echoing off the damp stone walls, "will Banquo's descendants inherit the throne?" The witches exchanged knowing glances, their eyes glinting with malice. In response, they conjured a chilling vision, a procession of 8 kings, each bearing an uncanny resemblance to Banquo. Behind them, Banquo's ghost followed, a triumphant smile playing on his spectral lips. The sight hit Macbeth like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his confidence crumbling like sand. The original prophecy about Banquo's lineage rang in his ears, a cruel reminder that his bloody deeds might have been for naught. As the vision faded, leaving Macbeth shaken to his core, a messenger burst into the cavern. Panting and wild-eyed, he delivered news that sent a fresh wave of panic through Macbeth's already troubled mind. "My lord," the messenger gasped, his words cutting through the thick air, "Macduff has fled to England." In that moment, Macbeth's fear crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. He saw Macduff's flight as a direct threat to his power, a challenge that needed to be crushed swiftly and mercilessly. Without hesitation, Macbeth made a decision that would mark a new level of cruelty in his reign. His eyes blazing with a mix of fear and determination, he barked out his orders. "To Macduff's castle! We'll strike at his heart by destroying all he holds dear." As Macbeth stormed out of the cavern, the witches' laughter echoing behind him, the weight of his choices hung heavy in the air. His blind faith in the prophecies and his brutal reaction to them set the stage for the final, tragic acts of his reign. With each step he took, Macbeth spiraled further into tyranny and madness. The forest seemed to close in around him, branches reaching out like accusing fingers. In the distance, he could almost hear the screams of innocents yet to be slaughtered. As he emerged from the woods, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. But for Macbeth, there would be no new day, only a deepening darkness. His mind raced with visions of blood and vengeance, consumed by paranoia and the witch's warning about Macduff. These thoughts drove him to desperate measures, pushing him towards a decision that would forever seal his fate. Macbeth's mind was consumed by paranoia and the witch's warning about Macduff. These thoughts drove him to desperate measures, leading him to order a savage attack on Macduff's castle at Fife. The night air hung heavy, thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to smother all sound. A group of murderers, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods, crept towards the unsuspecting household. Moonlight glinted off their blades, casting eerie shadows on the castle walls. Inside, Lady Macduff sat by the crackling fire, her children huddled close, their laughter a stark contrast to the approaching danger. Earlier that day, Lady Macduff had paced the cold stone floors, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Her heart ached with worry and confusion. "Why would he leave us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Does he not care for our safety?" Her young son, wise beyond his years, had tried to comfort her. "Mother," he'd said, his small hand reaching for hers, his eyes wide with innocence. "Father must have good reason. He's no traitor." His words, meant to soothe, now seemed like a cruel joke as the attackers burst through the doors. The air filled with screams and the clash of steel. The warm glow of the fire was overshadowed by the glint of blades and the terror in the eyes of the innocent. Lady Macduff, her maternal instincts kicking in, tried desperately to shield her children. Her heart pounded so fiercely she thought it might burst from her chest. Her brave young son, barely tall enough to wield a sword, stood defiantly before his mother. "You shall not harm her," he cried, his voice cracking with fear and determination. But his courage was no match for the brutality of Macbeth's men. The boy's defiant stance crumbled as the first blow fell. The massacre was swift and merciless. The once warm halls of Macduff's castle now ran red with the blood of innocents. As the last cries faded into silence, the murderers slipped away into the night, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid smell of fear. News of the atrocity spread like wildfire across Scotland. In taverns and marketplaces, people huddled together, their voices hushed with fear as they spoke of Macbeth's descent into madness. The king they once respected had become a monster, willing to slaughter women and children to keep his ill-gotten crown. The very mention of his name sent shivers down spines and silenced conversations. Meanwhile, in England, Ross arrived at Malcolm's camp, his face ashen with the burden of the news he carried. He found Macduff and Malcolm deep in discussion, their voices low and urgent as they planned their rebellion against the tyrant king. The air was charged with anticipation and determination. Ross's words fell like hammer blows on Macduff's heart. "Your castle is surprised, your wife and babes savagely slaughtered." The world seemed to spin around Macduff as he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of his loss. The ground beneath his feet felt unsteady, as if it might open up and swallow him whole. Guilt crashed over him like a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in its intensity. He had left them unprotected, vulnerable to Macbeth's cruelty. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, a primal scream tearing from his throat. "My children, too? All my pretty ones? Did you say all?" His voice was raw with anguish, each word a dagger to his own heart. Malcolm watched his friend's anguish, his own heart heavy with the weight of Scotland's suffering. He knelt beside Macduff, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Let this pain fuel your resolve," he urged, his voice low and intense. "Turn your grief into a weapon against Macbeth." As Macduff's sobs subsided, a steely determination took root in his eyes. The man who had been a cautious noble was gone, replaced by a warrior driven by an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. "I shall cut out Macbeth's black heart with my own hands," he vowed, his voice low and dangerous. The air around him seemed to crackle with the intensity of his resolve. Back in Scotland, a pall of fear and oppression settled over the land. Macbeth's tyrannical rule tightened like a noose around the necks of his subjects. Those who could fled, swelling the ranks of Malcolm's army across the border. The once vibrant streets of Scottish towns now lay silent, fear hanging in the air like a thick fog. The stage was set for the final confrontation. As Malcolm's forces gathered strength, Macduff stood at the forefront, a man transformed by tragedy. No longer fighting just for his country, he now carried the weight of personal vengeance. With every passing day, the inevitability of Macbeth's downfall grew, as did the hope for Scotland's liberation from his blood-soaked reign. As the sun set on another day of preparation, Malcolm stood at the edge of the camp, his eyes fixed on the distant Scottish border. The weight of his destiny pressed heavily upon him, and he couldn't help but wonder, would he be able to rally enough support to reclaim his rightful throne? Or would Macbeth's reign of terror continue unchecked, plunging Scotland further into darkness? Malcolm, the rightful heir to the Scottish throne, had found refuge in England from Macbeth's tyranny. There he began gathering support for his cause, drawing allies from among the Scottish nobles who had also fled their homeland. The air in the dimly lit chamber was thick with tension, like a fog that clung to every surface. Flickering torches cast long shadows on the stone walls, their dance mirroring the restless spirits of those gathered. Malcolm stood at the head of a worn oak table, his eyes scanning the faces of his supporters. Among them, Macduff's weathered visage stood out, etched with lines of grief and determination. Malcolm's heart raced as he prepared to test Macduff's loyalty. With a deep breath, he steeled himself for the deception he was about to weave. "My friends," he began, his voice low and filled with feigned shame, "I must confess something to you all." The room fell silent, the only sound the soft crackle of torch flames. Malcolm continued, his words falling like heavy stones in still water. "I am a man of endless appetites. My greed knows no bounds, and my lust would make the stars blush. I lack all the virtues a good king should possess." As Malcolm spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. The air grew heavier, pressing down on those gathered like a physical weight. Macduff's expression morphed from hope to despair, his eyes darkening with each word Malcolm uttered. "Alas, poor Scotland," Macduff lamented, his voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to hang in the air, a testament to the depth of his anguish. Under such a ruler, our beloved country would suffer even more than under Macbeth's iron fist. Malcolm's heart swelled with relief at Macduff's honest reaction. Like a storm cloud parting to reveal the sun, his demeanor changed. A smile broke across his face, and he placed a reassuring hand on Macduff's shoulder. "Fear not, my friend. I merely tested your loyalty, and you have proven true." The chamber erupted in a chorus of relieved sighs and murmurs of approval. The tension that had gripped the room moments before dissipated like morning mist, replaced by a surge of renewed hope and determination. With the air cleared, Malcolm and his allies turned their attention to planning their invasion. King Edward of England, a benevolent chess master in this Game of Thrones, provided 10,000 troops to support their cause. As word of Malcolm's return spread, more Scottish thanes defected to their side, their numbers swelling like a river after a spring thaw. Reports from Scotland painted a grim picture, each word a brushstroke in a canvas of despair. Macbeth's rule had become a nightmare, his cruelty increasing with each passing day. The people suffered under his tyranny, their spirits crushed like wheat beneath a millstone. "Macbeth fortifies Dunsinane," a messenger reported, his voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "He prepares for our attack, but his paranoia grows like a cancer within him." Malcolm listened intently, his resolve strengthening with each piece of news. He proved himself a capable leader, his strategy sharp and his words inspiring. In contrast, Macbeth's isolation grew, his paranoia a poisonous fog that clouded his judgment. Macduff, fueled by grief and a thirst for vengeance, became the heart of the rebellion. His eyes burned with determination as he vowed, "I shall face Macbeth myself. My blade will taste his blood, and Scotland will be free." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of promise and retribution. As the rebels prepared for their march, the scene in Scotland grew increasingly dire. Macbeth's rule had become erratic, his decisions as unpredictable as a storm-tossed sea. The once proud nation now cowered under the shadow of its tyrant king. Yet, in the midst of this darkness, Hope flickered like a candle in the wind. Malcolm's gathering force represented more than just an army. It was the promise of Scotland's liberation, the restoration of rightful rule. As they stood on the precipice of their final confrontation with Macbeth, the air crackled with the energy of impending change. As night fell and the rebels retired to rest before their impending march, a messenger arrived, breathless and wide-eyed. "My lord," he gasped, addressing Malcolm, "news from Scotland. It's about the Queen." His words trailed off, leaving a chilling silence that hinted at the turmoil unfolding across the border, where Lady Macbeth's grip on sanity was slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The weight of their crimes bore down heavily on Lady Macbeth in Scotland. Her mental state deteriorated rapidly as guilt consumed her very being. The once proud queen now wandered the cold stone corridors of Dunsinane Castle like a restless spirit, her feet carrying her through the night while her mind remained trapped in the horrors of the past. The air in the castle grew thick with an oppressive darkness, mirroring the turmoil within Lady Macbeth's soul. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by guttering torches that seemed to flicker in sympathy with her fragile psyche. The very stones of the castle seemed to whisper accusations, their rough surfaces catching at her nightgown as she passed. On this particularly chilling evening, a doctor and a gentlewoman stood witness to Lady Macbeth's nocturnal confessions. They watched, wide-eyed and trembling, as she paced back and forth, her white nightgown billowing around her like a ghostly shroud. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, now stared unseeing into the darkness as she furiously rubbed her hands together. "Out, damn spot!" she cried, her voice a haunting mixture of desperation and madness. "Out, I say!" The doctor leaned in closer, straining to catch every word as Lady Macbeth continued her frantic monologue. She spoke of blood, always blood, that stained her hands and refused to wash away. The murders of Duncan, Banquo, and Lady Macduff tumbled from her lips in a torrent of guilt-ridden confessions. "Here's the smell of the blood still," she moaned, bringing her hands to her face. "All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand." The gentlewoman clutched at her chest, her heart aching for the once proud woman before her. The doctor, his brow furrowed in concern, shook his head slowly. "This disease is beyond my practice," he muttered. "She needs divine help more than physical remedies." As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the castle walls, the doctor sought out Macbeth. The king, his mind consumed with the impending attack on his reign, barely spared a moment to listen to the physician's concerns. The weight of the crown seemed to press down on Macbeth's brow, etching deep lines of worry into his face. "Can you not minister to a mind diseased?" Macbeth demanded, his voice rough with impatience. "Pluck from the memory a rooted sorrow?" The doctor, choosing his words carefully, replied, "Therein the patient must minister to himself." Macbeth waved him away, turning his attention to the reports of the approaching enemy. He barked orders at his servants, demanding his armor be brought to him immediately. As he donned the heavy metal plates, the clanging of steel echoed through the halls, a stark contrast to the vulnerability of his wife's condition. The castle buzzed with nervous energy as preparations for battle intensified. Amidst the clanging of weapons and the shouts of soldiers, Lady Macbeth's deterioration continued unchecked. She wandered the halls like a lost spirit, her once strong will now as fragile as spun glass. The sound of her bare feet padding against the cold stone floors mingled with the metallic symphony of war preparations, creating a discordant melody that seemed to herald the approaching doom. In a cruel twist of fate, the very ambition that had driven Lady Macbeth to push her husband toward the throne now ate away at her sanity. The foundations of their ill-gotten power crumbled beneath them, much like the walls of their own minds. The air grew thick with tension, broken only by the occasional wail from Lady Macbeth's chambers. Servants whispered in corners, their eyes darting nervously as they spoke of their mistress's condition. Then in the quiet hours before dawn, a piercing cry echoed through the stone corridors. Lady Macbeth, unable to bear the weight of her guilt any longer, had taken her own life. The news spread through the castle like wildfire, reaching Macbeth as he stood in the great hall, fully armored and ready for battle. For a moment the world seemed to stop. Macbeth stood frozen, the weight of his wife's death settling over him like a heavy cloak. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, devoid of the fire that had once driven him to such terrible deeds. She should have died hereafter, he murmured, more to himself than to the messenger who had brought the news. There would have been a time for such a word. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, Macbeth found himself more alone than ever. The crown that had once seemed so desirable now sat heavy on his brow, a constant reminder of all he had lost in his pursuit of power. With the enemy at his gates and his wife gone, Macbeth faced his final hours as king. The emptiness of his ambition laid bare before him. Outside the castle walls, a mist began to rise from the ground, creeping through the surrounding forest like ghostly fingers. As Macbeth gazed out from the battlements, his eyes narrowed at a strange sight in the distance. The trees of Birnam Wood seemed to be moving, their branches swaying despite the stillness of the air. Was this some trick of the light, or had his mind finally succumbed to the madness that had claimed his wife? As the mist thickened, obscuring his view, Macbeth couldn't shake the feeling that his doom was approaching, carried on the very boughs of the forest itself. Malcolm and Macduff's forces approached Dunsinane, their footsteps echoing through the misty air. As they marched, they passed through the dense foliage of Birnam Wood, unaware of the pivotal role this forest would play in their fate. The fog clung to the ground like a ghostly blanket, muffling the sound of their advance. Malcolm's eyes scanned the ranks of his men, their faces grim and determined. A plan was forming in his mind, a stroke of tactical brilliance born from desperation. "Each man, cut a branch," he ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll move like the forest itself." The soldiers obeyed, the soft rustle of leaves and snap of twigs filling the air. Little did Malcolm know his clever strategy was about to fulfill a part of the witch's ominous prophecy. Meanwhile, within the cold stone walls of Dunsinane Castle, Macbeth paced restlessly. The weight of his crown seemed to grow heavier with each step, the once coveted power now a burden that threatened to crush him. The air felt thick, oppressive, mirroring the darkness that had taken root in his soul. Suddenly, a messenger burst in, his face ashen. "My lord," he stammered, "the Queen. She's gone." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Macbeth stood frozen, the news of his wife's suicide washing over him like icy water. In that moment, something inside him shattered. He turned to the window, his eyes unseeing as he began to speak. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time. His words, once filled with fire and ambition, now dripped with emptiness and despair. The meaninglessness of life, the futility of his actions, all crashed down upon him like a crumbling mountain. Yet even as he teetered on the brink of despair, a part of him clung desperately to the witch's prophecies. They had promised him invincibility, hadn't they? The castle walls seemed to close in around Macbeth as the battle began. The air crackled with tension, punctuated by the distant clash of steel and cries of men. A messenger, wide-eyed and breathless, burst into the room. "My lord," he gasped, "Birnam Wood! It moves!" Macbeth's blood ran cold. The pieces of the prophecy fell into place like a grotesque puzzle. He had been deceived, led astray by his own ambition and the witch's twisted words. Fear, an emotion long forgotten, began to creep into his heart, but with it came a fierce determination. If this was to be his last stand, he would make it one to remember. With trembling hands that soon steadied, Macbeth donned his armor. The weight of it was familiar, comforting even. He strode out to meet his fate, his sword gleaming in the dim light. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. Men clashed, steel rang against steel, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood. Macbeth fought like a man possessed, his blade finding its mark again and again. Young Siward, the son of the English general, fell before him, a testament to Macbeth's ferocity. But fate had one last cruel twist in store. Through the fog of war, Macbeth found himself face to face with Macduff. A grim smile played on Macbeth's lips as he remembered the prophecy. "I fear no man born of woman," he declared, his voice ringing with false confidence. Macduff's response hit him like a physical blow. "I was from my mother's womb untimely ripped," he growled, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. In that moment, Macbeth's world crumbled. The last vestiges of hope slipped away like sand through his fingers. He saw clearly now the deceptive nature of the witch's words. the trap he had willingly walked into. Yet even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Macbeth's warrior spirit flared. He raised his sword, meeting Macduff's challenge. Their duel was fierce, a dance of steel and vengeance. But in the end, it was Macduff who prevailed. With a final decisive blow, he struck Macbeth down. As Macbeth's life ebbed away, the sounds of battle faded. The world seemed to slow, the chaos of war giving way to an eerie stillness. His final breaths were shallow, his eyes fixed on the sky above. In those last moments, the weight of his actions, the price of his ambition, crashed down upon him. With a final, shuddering gasp, the tyrant king was no more. Malcolm, surrounded by his victorious troops, was crowned the new king of Scotland. His voice, strong and clear, rang out across the blood-soaked field. He spoke of healing, of justice, of a new era for their wounded nation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, a sense of hope began to stir. The air filled with cheers as Malcolm was hailed as the rightful king. The people, long oppressed under Macbeth's reign of terror, dared to dream of a brighter future. As twilight descended, the first stars peeked out from behind the clouds, like pinpricks of hope in the darkening sky. The reign of terror was over, and with it, the promise of peace and legitimate rule dawned for Scotland. As Malcolm stood before his people, the crown resting upon his brow, he felt the weight of responsibility settle upon his shoulders. But unlike Macbeth, he welcomed it, ready to lead his nation into a new chapter of its tumultuous history. As night fell, the battlefield grew quiet. The dead were honored, the wounded tended to. In the distance, the lights of Dunsinane Castle flickered, no longer a symbol of tyranny, but a beacon of hope for a nation reborn. The wheel of fate had turned, and Scotland, battered but unbroken, stood ready to face the dawn of a new day.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.